The wind screamed across the Wyoming plains like a living thing bent on destruction. February 1883 had arrived with the kind of cold that could kill a man in under an hour, the kind that turned breath to ice and stole feeling from fingers before you even knew they were gone. Sarah Hartford pressed her face against the stagecoach window, watching the world disappear into swirling white. She had 17 cents in her pocket, a medical bag clutched against her chest, and nowhere left to run. The coach lurched violently to one side. Sarah's head cracked against the wooden frame. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard the driver cursing, heard the horses screaming in panic. Then everything stopped moving. The driver's face appeared at the window, red from cold and hard with decision. "Horse broke its leg. Can't go on. You'll have to walk the rest." Sarah stared at him. "Walk in this?" "How far to the station?" 15 miles, maybe more. Storm's getting worse." He was already unhitching the remaining horses, already abandoning her to the white fury. "Stay with the coach if you want. Someone might come through when it clears." "Might," Sarah's voice cracked. "When will that be?" The driver didn't answer. He swung onto one of the horses and disappeared into the blizzard without looking back. The sound of hoofbeats faded fast, swallowed by the wind. Sarah sat alone in the coach, watching snow pile against the windows, and understood with perfect clarity that she was going to die here. She thought about Martin, about his fists and his rage and the bottle that lived in his hand, about the morphine she had given him that last night, measured carefully into his whiskey while he slept. Just enough to keep him unconscious while she packed her bag and slipped out the door, except it hadn't been just enough. The telegram had reached her 3 days into her journey west. Colonel Martin Hartford, decorated officer-beloved husband, found dead in his study. Suspected poisoning. Wife wanted for questioning. Sarah pulled her thin coat tighter and made a decision. She would not die in this coach. She would not let Martin win even from the grave. The cold hit her like a fist the moment she stepped outside. The wind tore at her skirts, sent her medical bag flying from her hands. She lunged after it, fingers already going numb as she fought to retrieve it. Everything she knew, everything she had learned during 4 years of war, every skill that had kept soldiers alive on blood-soaked battlefields was in that bag. Without it, she was nothing. Just another desperate woman fleeing a dead man's reputation. She forced herself to move, one foot in front of the other. The snow was already knee-deep and rising. She couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. No road, no landmarks, just white and cold, and the knowledge that every minute out here brought her closer to freezing. Her father had died when she was 16. Her mother had followed him 2 years later, leaving Sarah alone with debts and a wealthy suitor who seemed like salvation. Martin Hartford had been handsome in his uniform, charming when he wanted to be. The bruises didn't start until after the wedding, until after the war ended and the drinking began. 4 years she had endured it. 4 years of split lips and broken ribs and lies, told to doctors about falling downstairs. The morphine had been mercy. She told herself that as she stumbled through the snow, told herself she had only meant to escape, not to kill, but the truth sat heavy in her chest alongside the cold. She had known exactly how much to give him, had measured it with the precision of someone who had administered medicine to dying men, had watched him drink it down and felt nothing but relief. Now the cold was taking that relief away, replacing it with the animal panic of someone who realized too late that they had traded one death for another. She fell, got up, fell again. Her hands were beyond feeling now. Her feet were blocks of ice inside her boots. The medical bag felt like it weighed 100 pounds. She should drop it, should let it go and move faster. But without it, what was she? Who was she? The wind shifted, and for just a moment she thought she heard something. A voice, calling out words she couldn't make out through the storm. She tried to answer, but her jaw was locked with cold. Her voice a whisper that the wind swallowed whole. Then she saw him, a shape on horseback, solid and real against the swirling white, moving toward her with purpose, with direction, as if he knew exactly where she would be. Sarah wanted to call out, but her voice was gone. She lifted one hand, a pathetic gesture that surely he couldn't see. But he turned his horse directly toward her, and she realized he had been looking for her, specifically for her. Over here. His voice cut through the storm, deep and steady and impossibly calm. Follow my voice. Keep moving toward me. Sarah tried. Her legs gave out instead. She hit the snow hard, felt it closing over her like a grave. This was it then. This was how it ended. Not in Philadelphia facing trial for Martin's death, but here in the middle of nowhere, frozen and forgotten. Strong hands grabbed her, lifted her. She felt herself being hoisted onto a horse, felt the animal's warmth beneath her, even through her frozen clothes. The man swung up behind her, wrapped his coat around them both. His body was a furnace against her back. "I've got you." He kicked the horse into motion. "I've got you now." Sarah wanted to ask who he was, how he had found her, why he had been looking, but the questions died unspoken. Consciousness slipped away like water through frozen fingers, and the last thing she felt was the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her and the solid warmth of the stranger at her back. She woke to heat and light and pain. The pain came from everywhere at once, as feeling returned to her hands and feet, a burning agony that made her cry out. Someone was there immediately, a rough hand gentle on her shoulder. "Easy. It's the cold leaving your body. It'll pass." Sarah forced her eyes open. She was lying on a bed in a small cabin. A fire roared in the stone fireplace. The man from the storm knelt beside her, and in the firelight she could finally see his face. Weathered and hard with gray eyes that watched her with concern, but no surprise, as if finding frozen women in blizzards was something he did regularly. "Who are you?" Her voice came out as a croak. "Jacob Brennan. Most call me Jake. This is my ranch." He stood moved to the fire where a pot of something steaming sat waiting. "Drink this. Slowly." The tea was bitter and strong and burned all the way down. Sarah's hands shook so badly she could barely hold the cup. Jake took it from her, held it to her lips while she drank. The gesture was surprisingly gentle from such large hands. "How did you find me?" Sarah asked when she could speak again. Jake was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Lost a calf in the storm. Went out looking for it. Heard the coach pass on the road earlier, figured it wouldn't make it far in this weather. When I found the abandoned coach with the broken horse still in harness, I knew someone was out there." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Felt like I was supposed to find you, like someone was telling me to keep looking." Sarah didn't know what to say to that. She looked down at herself and realized with horror that she was wearing only her undergarments. Her dress and coat were hanging by the fire, steaming as they dried. Jake followed her gaze and had the grace to look uncomfortable. "You were soaked through. Wet clothes will kill you faster than no clothes in cold like this. I didn't look more than necessary." Heat flooded Sarah's face, though whether from embarrassment or the returning warmth, she couldn't tell. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "My bag. I had a medical bag." "On the table." Jake gestured to a rough wooden table where her battered leather bag sat, snow melt pooling beneath it. "Seemed important to you. You wouldn't let go of it even unconscious." Relief washed through her. Everything she had left in the world was in that bag. Her instruments, her medicines, the proof of who she had been before Martin, before the morphine and the flight west. As if reading her thoughts, Jake said, "You running from something." Sarah met his eyes. They were the color of winter storms, hard but not unkind. She made a decision in that moment, the same kind of split-second decision she had made 1,000 times on battlefields when choosing between truth and lies could mean the difference between life and death. "Yes?" Jake nodded slowly. "Law or family?" "Both." Another long silence. The fire crackled. Wind howled outside, reminding them both how close to death she had been, how close she still might be if this man decided to turn her in for whatever reward might be on her head. "Well," Jake said finally, "storm's not letting up any time soon. You're stuck here at least a few days. We can figure out what comes next when the weather clears." He stood and moved toward the door, pulling on a heavy coat. Sarah felt panic rise in her chest. "Where are you going?" "Barn. Got livestock that needs tending storm or no storm." He paused with his hand on the door. "There's food in the pot by the fire. Eat if you're hungry. There's a girl sleeping in the back room. Name's Emma. She's 8, my brother's daughter. He died at Antietam." Jake's voice went flat on that last word, the kind of flat that spoke of old grief, still sharp. "Her ma couldn't handle raising her alone, left her with me 5 years back. Haven't seen her since. Sarah absorbed this information, understanding suddenly why this stranger had risked his life in a blizzard for someone he didn't know. He understood what it meant to be abandoned, to be left behind by people who should have stayed. Emma's had a cough, Jake continued, not looking at Sarah. Nothing serious, but it won't quit. If you've got anything in that bag of yours that might help, I'd be grateful. With that, he was gone, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts in the warm cabin and the knowledge that she had somehow stumbled into sanctuary with a man who asked few questions and expected nothing in return. She forced herself to stand on shaking legs and made her way to the back room. A small girl lay sleeping in a narrow bed, her breathing audible even from the doorway. The wet, rattling quality of it made Sarah's trained ears prick up immediately. Not just a cough. Bronchitis, probably. Maybe the beginnings of pneumonia if it went untreated. Sarah retrieved her medical bag and knelt beside the bed. Emma stirred, opened eyes the same gray as her uncle's. She stared at Sarah without fear, with the kind of calm acceptance children learned when life had already taught them that adults could disappear without warning. "Who are you? My name is Sarah. Your uncle found me in the storm. I'm a nurse." "You gonna stay?" The question was so direct, so hopeful, that Sarah's throat tightened. "I don't know yet, sweetheart, but while I'm here, I'm going to make sure that cough gets better. Can I listen to your chest?" Emma nodded and sat up, pulling her nightgown aside with the unself-conscious ease of a child used to being examined. Sarah placed her ear against the small back and listened. Definitely bronchitis. She could hear the congestion in the lower lungs, the struggle for air that would only get worse without treatment. She mixed a tincture from her supplies, measuring carefully. Horehound and wild cherry bark for the cough, a touch of camphor to help her breathe. Emma drank it without complaint, making a face at the bitter taste, but not arguing. "That tastes awful," the girl said. "Medicine usually does, but it'll help, I promise." Sarah smoothed the blankets around Emma's shoulders. "Try to sleep now. Are you going to be here when I wake up?" Sarah looked at this small girl with her careful hope and her uncle's eyes and felt something crack open in her chest. "Yes, I'll be here." Emma smiled and closed her eyes, settling back into sleep with the easy trust of childhood. Sarah stayed beside the bed longer than necessary, watching the rise and fall of the girl's breathing, listening to the storm rage outside. She thought about Martin again, about the morphine and the telegram and the long flight west that had ended here in this remote cabin with strangers who had no reason to help her but did anyway. She returned to the main room and found her dress dry enough to wear. She was pulling it on when Jake came back inside, snow-crusted in his dark beard, cold radiating off him in waves. Emma awake. I gave her something for the cough. She needs to rest and stay warm. No going outside until that chest clears up. Jake nodded, hanging his coat on a peg by the door. "You a real nurse, or just someone with a bag full of medicine?" Sarah stiffened. "I trained at the Satterley Hospital in Philadelphia during the war. Worked there for 4 years treating soldiers. I've set broken bones, amputated limbs, delivered babies in field hospitals, while artillery shells landed 50 yards away. So yes, I'm a real nurse." Something changed in Jake's expression. Respect, maybe, or surprise. "Satterley. That was a Union hospital." It was. "My brother David died in a Confederate prison camp, Emma's father. You save any rebels during your time there." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I saved anyone they brought me. North or South didn't matter when a boy was bleeding out on a table. War was over the moment they became my patient." For a long, tense moment, Jake said nothing. Then he nodded, something like approval in his eyes. "Fair enough. Emma seems to like you. That's rare. She doesn't warm to people easy. She's a sweet girl. She's a stubborn girl who's seen too much loss for her age." Jake moved to the fire-ladled stew into 2 bowls. He handed one to Sarah. "Eat. You need food after being that cold." They ate in silence. Sarah, too hungry to care that the stew was plain and under-seasoned. When she had scraped the bowl clean, Jake refilled it without asking. This time she ate more slowly, letting the warmth settle into her bones. "The ranch," she said finally. "How many people work here?" "Just me and Emma. Had 2 hands, but they left last fall. Couldn't afford to keep them through winter." Jake stared into his bowl. "Got about 40 head of cattle, dozen horses. It's enough to get by. Barely." Sarah understood what he wasn't saying. Money was tight. Help was needed. A nurse who appeared out of a blizzard might seem like providence to a man raising a sick child alone. "I can help," Sarah heard herself say. "With Emma, with the ranch. However you need." Jake looked up sharply. "In exchange for what, room and board, and $8 a month." Sarah kept her voice steady, professional. "I can tend sick animals same as people. Can cook and clean. Teach Emma her letters if she doesn't know them yet. She knows some. I've been teaching her what I can, but I'm no school teacher." Jake studied her face in the firelight. $8 is steep for what amounts to housekeeping. "I'm not offering housekeeping. I'm offering medical care. How much would you pay a doctor to come out here every time Emma got sick or one of your animals needed treatment?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he held out his hand. "Deal, but I've got conditions of my own." Sarah shook his hand, feeling calluses rough against her palm. "What conditions?" "I don't ask about whatever you're running from. You don't lie to me if I do ask. And you don't touch me unless there's a medical reason." The last condition came out hard and fast, and Sarah understood immediately. This man had been hurt, had built walls around himself same as she had. Whatever story had made him this way, it had left scars that ran deeper than skin. "Agreed," Sarah said quietly. "Same goes for me. No touching unless necessary. No questions about my past." They shook again, sealing the bargain. Two damaged people offering each other the same thing, safety without intimacy, help without entanglement. It should have felt cold, transactional. Instead, it felt like the first honest agreement Sarah had made in years. The storm lasted 3 days. Sarah spent them learning the rhythms of the ranch, the shape of her new temporary life. She treated Emma's cough, watched the congestion slowly clear from the girl's lungs. She helped Jake tend the animals in the barn, learning which cows were temperamental and which horses had old injuries that flared up in cold weather. She cooked meals from the limited supplies in the pantry, stretching what was there to feed 3 people instead of 2. Emma followed her everywhere, a small shadow with gray eyes and endless questions. Sarah found herself softening in ways she hadn't expected, found herself laughing at the girl's observations about the world. Emma had been teaching herself to read from an old Bible and a few tattered books, and Sarah spent evenings helping her sound out difficult words, watching pride bloom on the small face when she got them right. Jake watched these interactions with something like hunger in his eyes, though he never said anything. He kept his distance, sleeping in the barn, even during the worst of the storm, eating quickly, and leaving the cabin as soon as meals were done. Sarah understood. He was protecting himself, protecting both of them from the risk of comfort, from the danger of starting to need someone who would inevitably leave. On the 4th morning, Sarah woke to silence. The wind had stopped. She rose and looked out the window to see a world transformed. Snow lay thick and pristine across everything, brilliant in the early sun. The sky was impossibly blue, the kind of blue that made you forget winter could kill you. Jake was already up hitching horses to a wagon. Sarah pulled on her coat and went outside, breath steaming in the crystal air. "Storm's over," Jake said without preamble. "Road should be clear enough to get to town by afternoon. If you're still set on moving on, now's the time." Sarah looked at the wagon, at the ranch spread out behind them, snow-covered and isolated, at the cabin where Emma still slept, breathing easy for the first time since Sarah had arrived. She thought about the 17 cents in her pocket, about Philadelphia and Colonel Drake, and the wanted posters that were probably spreading across every town between here and the coast. "I made a deal," she said. $8 a month, plus room and board. I don't break my deals." Something that might have been relief crossed Jake's face. Gone so quickly, Sarah almost missed it. "Town's still necessary. We need supplies. And you'll need to be registered if you're staying. People around here talk. Better they think you're here legitimate than start asking questions." Cold fear trickled down Sarah's spine. "Registered how? As my employee, or—" Jake paused, not looking at her. "As my wife." Sarah stared at him. "What? Marriage certificate's easier to explain than a strange woman living on a ranch with a single man and his niece. Folks around here are traditional. They'll assume things, talk, could bring the kind of attention you're probably trying to avoid." He was right, Sarah realized with sick certainty. A wife was invisible, unremarkable. A female employee living in sin with her employer would draw exactly the scrutiny she couldn't afford. It would just be on paper, Jake continued, still not meeting her eyes. Wouldn't change the arrangement. You'd still have your room, your privacy. I'd still sleep in the barn. Nobody needs to know it's not real except us. Sarah thought about this offer, turned it over in her mind from every angle. A new name, legal protection, the safety of appearing normal, conventional, beyond suspicion. And all she had to give in return was a signature on a marriage certificate and the pretense of being someone's wife. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "Why risk it?" Jake finally looked at her, and his eyes were older than his face. "Because Emma needs you. Because this ranch needs help I can't afford to hire. And because I know what it's like to be running from something you can't outrun. Sometimes the only thing you can do is stop running and make a stand somewhere. Might as well make it here." Sarah held his gaze, seeing the truth in it. This man who had pulled her from a blizzard, who asked no questions and expected nothing, who was offering her the greatest gift anyone could offer, a chance to disappear in plain sight. "If we do this," Sarah said slowly, "there are things you should know about me, about why I'm running." "Don't need to know, don't want to know." Jake's voice was firm. "The only thing I need to know is whether you'll take good care of Emma and hold up your end of our bargain. The rest is your business." "What about the preacher? Won't he ask questions? Want to know where I came from? Reverend Davis asks the questions I tell him to ask, and no more. He's performed plenty of quick marriages for men in these parts. Mail-order brides, widow women looking for security, all kinds of situations. He's practical about these things." Sarah made her decision. The same way she had decided to give Martin the morphine, the same way she had decided to step out of that stagecoach into the blizzard instead of waiting to freeze. Quick and clean and final. "All right, but I have a condition too." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What condition?" "We tell Emma the truth. Maybe not all of it, but she deserves to know this isn't a love match, that it's an arrangement for practical purposes. I won't lie to that little girl." For the first time since she had met him, Jake smiled. It transformed his face, made him look younger, almost gentle. "Deal." They rode into town that afternoon, Emma bundled between them on the wagon seat, excited by the rare trip away from the ranch. The town of Prescott was small, just a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a handful of houses scattered around the edges. People stared as they passed, and Sarah felt their eyes like weights on her skin. At the general store, a lean man with sharp eyes watched them from behind the counter. "Jake, didn't expect to see you in town with weather like we've been having." "Storm's over, Hoskins. Need supplies." Jake handed over a list. "And I'd like to introduce my wife. Sarah, this is Walter Hoskins, runs the store." Hoskins' eyes sharpened on Sarah. "Wife didn't know you'd married." "Just did. Reverend Davis performed the ceremony this morning." The lie came smooth from Jake's mouth, practiced and easy. Sarah forced a smile and nodded. Hoskins stared at her a moment too long, something calculating in his expression. Then he turned to fill the supply order, and Sarah breathed again. While Hoskins gathered flour and coffee and other necessities, Emma tugged on Sarah's sleeve. "Can I look at the penny candy? Ask your uncle." Emma ran to Jake, who dug in his pocket and produced a penny with exaggerated reluctance. Emma squealed and ran to the candy jars, and Jake's expression softened, watching her. "She likes you," he said quietly to Sarah. "Already asked me this morning if you were staying forever." "What did you tell her?" "That forever's a long time and we shouldn't make promises we can't keep, but that you'd be here for now, and now was good enough." Sarah felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. This man understood that forever was a fairy tale, and now was all anyone could honestly offer. Hoskins returned with their supplies and a strange look on his face. "Say, Mrs. Brennan, you look familiar. You been out west before?" Sarah's heart stopped. "No. This is my first time in Wyoming." "Huh." Hoskins scratched his chin. "Could swear I've seen your face somewhere. You got family back east?" "Everyone's got family somewhere," Jake cut in, voice hard. "How much do we owe you, Hoskins?" While Jake paid, Sarah moved to where Emma was agonizing over candy choices, trying to keep her face calm while her mind raced. Had Hoskins seen a wanted poster? Were they distributed this far west already? How long before someone connected Sarah Hartford wanted for murder with Sarah Brennan, newly arrived wife. They were loading supplies into the wagon when Hoskins appeared in the doorway of the store holding a piece of paper. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the word "Wanted" printed across the top in bold letters. "Jake," Hoskins called out, "got something you should see." Time seemed to slow. Sarah watched Jake walk back to the store, watched Hoskins hand him the poster, watched Jake's face as he read it, watched his eyes find her across the distance. For a long moment they stared at each other, and Sarah knew with perfect certainty that her brief sanctuary was over. Then Jake did something that would change everything. He crumpled the poster in his fist and handed it back to Hoskins. "Don't know her," he said flatly. "Now, if you're done wasting my time, I've got a ranch to run." He climbed onto the wagon, took the reins, and started the horses moving before Hoskins could respond. Sarah sat frozen beside him, Emma chattering happily between them, completely unaware of what had just happened. They were a mile out of town before Sarah found her voice. "You saw it, the poster. You know who I am now. I know who they say you are. Don't mean I know the truth." Jake kept his eyes on the road. "You killed someone. No point in lying now. My husband, Martin Hartford. He was a colonel, a decorated officer." Sarah's voice came out flat, emotionless. "He was also a drunk who beat me for 4 years. The night I left, I gave him morphine in his whiskey, enough to keep him unconscious while I packed and ran, enough apparently to kill him." Jake was quiet for so long, Sarah thought he might turn the wagon around right there, take her back to Hoskins and the law and whatever justice waited. Instead, he said, "You a murderer, Sarah. You kill him on purpose. I don't know." The truth came out raw and painful. "I knew how much morphine was safe. I measured more than that. I told myself I just wanted him to sleep, but I knew. Part of me knew it might be too much, and I gave it to him anyway." More silence. The wagon wheels creaked. Emma hummed a tune to herself, oblivious. "Seems to me," Jake said finally, "that a woman who spent 4 years saving lives in a war hospital might know exactly how much morphine it takes to kill a man. Seems to me, if you'd wanted him dead, you'd have given him a lot more and made sure of it." Sarah turned to look at him. "You believe that. I believe you did what you had to do to survive, same as any soldier in a war, and if he died from it, maybe that's justice for what he did to you all those years." Jake met her eyes briefly before returning his attention to the road. "Either way, it's not my business to judge. You've been nothing but good to Emma, and honest in your dealings with me. That's all I need to know. The law won't see it that way. Law's a long way from here, and Hoskins is greedy. If there's a reward on that poster, he'll think about it a while before deciding whether to claim it. We've got time to figure this out." "We." The word settled into Sarah's chest like warmth. "Not you, not your problem. We." "Thank you," she whispered. Jake shrugged. "Don't thank me yet. This could still go bad in 100 different ways." They rode the rest of the way in silence. When they reached the ranch, Jake helped them unload supplies, then disappeared to tend the animals. Sarah made dinner while Emma set the table, chattering about the penny candy she had chosen and the pretty ribbons she had seen in the store. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah found Jake in the barn. He was brushing down one of the horses with methodical strokes, not looking up when she entered. "I know you said you don't want to know the details," Sarah said, "but I need to tell someone. I need to say it out loud." Jake kept brushing. "All right." Sarah told him everything, about Martin's drinking and his fists, about the broken ribs and split lips, and the doctor who had looked the other way because Martin was a respected officer, about the morphine she had stolen from the hospital stores bottle by bottle over months until she had enough, about mixing it into his whiskey while he snored in his chair, about watching him drink it down, about walking out the door and not looking back. "I didn't check if he was breathing," Sarah said. "I could have. I'm a nurse. I know how to check for signs of life. But I didn't want to know. I wanted to be gone before I had to find out if he was dead or just sleeping." Jake finished with the horse and finally turned to face her. "You telling me this because you feel guilty or because you want me to condemn you? I don't know. Maybe both." "Well, I'm not going to do either." Jake hung up. The brush leaned against the stall door. "My wife Rebecca died birthing twins. Both babies died with her. I was out with the cattle when it happened. By the time I got back, It was too late to do anything but bury them. His voice went rough. I've spent 5 years wondering if I'd been there, if I'd gone for the doctor sooner, if I'd done something different, would they still be alive? Truth is, I'll never know. And beating myself up over it won't change what happened. That's different. You didn't cause Rebecca's death. Didn't I? I'm the one who got her pregnant. I'm the one who brought her out to this isolated ranch where help was hours away. I'm the one who left her alone when she needed me most. Jake's eyes were hard. Point is, Sarah, we all carry guilt for things we did or didn't do, but guilt doesn't change the past. It just poisons the present. So you can spend the rest of your life feeling bad about what happened to Martin, or you can accept that you did what you thought you had to do and move forward. Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes. How do you just move forward, one day at a time, one task at a time? You get up, you do the work, you take care of the people who need you. Eventually, the guilt gets quieter, never goes away completely, but it stops being the only thing you hear. They stood in silence, two damaged people, in a barn that smelled of hay and horses and honest work. Outside, the Wyoming night was cold and clear, stars brilliant overhead. Sarah thought about running again, about taking her 17 cents and her medical bag and disappearing into some other life in some other place. But she was tired of running, tired of being afraid. And this place, this strange arrangement with this closed-off man and his sweet niece, felt more like home than anywhere had in years. The marriage certificate, Sarah said. Were you serious about that? Dead serious. We go to Reverend Davis tomorrow, make it legal. You become Sarah Brennan, and Sarah Hartford disappears. Jake paused. Unless you've got objections to taking my name. No objections. Just want to make sure you understand what you're risking. If they find me, if someone connects us, you could be charged with harboring a fugitive. Then we better make sure they don't find you. Sarah nodded slowly. One more thing. When we do this, when we get married, I need you to understand that it changes nothing about our arrangement. I'm still sleeping in the cabin. You're still sleeping in the barn. This is business, not romance. Something flickered in Jake's eyes. Pain, maybe, or old grief. Wouldn't want it any other way. I buried my heart with Rebecca. What's left is just going through motions. A paper marriage suits me fine. Good. Then we have a deal. They shook hands in the dim barn, sealing a bargain that was equal parts sanctuary and deception. Sarah returned to the cabin, climbed into bed beside Emma's sleeping form, and stared at the ceiling for hours. Tomorrow, she would become someone else, would take a new name and a new identity, and hope it was enough to keep the past from catching up. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled softly, carrying snow across the frozen ground. Inside, Sarah Hartford closed her eyes and tried to imagine a future where she could finally stop running, where she could build something real from the ashes of everything she had destroyed, where a man who asked no questions and a little girl who needed a mother might become something more than a temporary shelter from the storm. She fell asleep to the sound of Emma's steady breathing and woke to dawn light streaming through the window. In the main room, Jake was already up, dressed in his best clothes, such as they were. Emma sat at the table eating porridge, swinging her legs and watching Sarah with bright, curious eyes. "Uncle Jake says you're getting married today for real," Emma announced, "with a preacher and everything." Sarah looked at Jake, who shrugged. "Told you we should tell her the truth, so I did. Explained that it's a business arrangement, that you're staying to help with the ranch and be her nurse, and that getting married makes it proper in the eyes of the town." "And I said that's stupid," Emma added cheerfully, "because if you like each other enough to live together, you might as well be married for real instead of pretend." Out of the mouths of babes, Sarah thought. It's complicated, sweetheart. Adults always say that when they're being dumb about feelings. Emma went back to her porridge, clearly done with the conversation. Jake and Sarah exchanged glances, and despite everything, despite the fear and the guilt and the uncertain future, Sarah felt the corner of her mouth twitch up in an almost smile. They rode to Reverend Davis's house an hour later. The Reverend was an old man with kind eyes and a practical manner. He asked no questions beyond the necessary ones, wrote their names in his ledger, and had them speak their vows in front of two witnesses pulled from the street. The whole ceremony took less than 10 minutes. When it was done, Sarah wore a simple gold band that had belonged to Rebecca offered by Jake with no ceremony and no sentiment, just a practical solution to a practical problem. Emma watched the proceedings with solemn attention, then asked if they could have cake to celebrate. They couldn't, but Jake bought her another piece of penny candy as consolation. Walking back to the wagon, Sarah caught sight of their reflection in the general store window. A family. That's what they looked like. A husband, a wife, a daughter. The picture of respectability and normalcy. No one looking at them would guess the truth. Would see the wanted woman and the grieving widower and the orphaned girl, all three of them playing parts in a performance designed to keep the wolves at bay. Hoskins appeared in the store doorway as they passed. "Congratulations on the marriage, Jake. Mrs. Brennan." His eyes lingered on Sarah. "Still say you look familiar." "I've got one of those faces," Sarah said lightly. "People are always thinking they know me from somewhere." "Maybe." Hoskins didn't sound convinced. "Well, welcome to Prescott. Hope you'll be happy here." They rode home in silence, the marriage certificate folded in Jake's pocket, Emma dozing between them. Sarah felt the weight of her new name settling onto her shoulders. Sarah Brennan, wife, nurse, woman with a past she couldn't escape, and a future she didn't dare hope for. That night, Jake moved his things to the barn as always. Sarah put Emma to bed, then sat by the fire and stared at the gold band on her finger. A dead woman's ring for a woman trying to rise from her own ashes. It should have felt wrong. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing she had done in years. Outside, the Wyoming wind sang its endless song, carrying snow and secrets across the frozen land. Inside, Sarah Brennan closed her eyes and let herself believe just for a moment that she might actually survive this, that the blizzard that had nearly killed her had instead delivered her to exactly where she needed to be. Time would tell if that was faith or foolishness. But for now, for tonight, it was enough. Spring came to Wyoming like a promise half-kept. The snow melted in fits and starts, leaving the ground muddy and treacherous. Sarah had been at Brennan Meadows for 6 weeks, and the rhythm of ranch life had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. Rise before dawn, tend the animals with Jake cook breakfast, while Emma practiced her letters, spend the day mending fences or treating sick livestock or teaching the girl everything from reading to basic first aid. Fall into bed exhausted, wake up and do it again. It should have felt like drudgery. Instead, it felt like building something, like laying foundation stones for a structure she couldn't yet see but could sense taking shape around her. Emma's cough had cleared within a week of Sarah's arrival. The girl had gained weight, lost the pale fragility that had marked her when Sarah first arrived. She followed Sarah everywhere, a small shadow with endless questions about medicine and healing and the war Sarah had survived. Sarah found herself telling stories she had thought buried forever, about soldiers younger than they should have been and braver than anyone had a right to expect, about amputations performed by candlelight while artillery shook the walls, about the strange intimacy of tending dying men who called for mothers they would never see again. Jake listened to these stories from across the room, pretending to work on tack or clean his rifle. But Sarah saw the way his hands stilled when she talked about the things she had seen, the weight of shared experience settling between them. He had been at Antietam, where his brother died, had seen the same kind of carnage, survived the same kind of hell. It created an understanding that needed no words. The town remained a source of tension. Hoskins watched Sarah too closely whenever they went for supplies, asked too many questions about where she had learned nursing, whether she had family back east, how she and Jake had met. Sarah's answers stayed vague and consistent, but the lies tasted bitter every time. Then came the morning that changed everything. Sarah was in the barn treating a mare with a swollen leg when she heard Jake shout. Not anger, alarm. She dropped her supplies and ran, finding him standing over a cow, lying on her side in the birthing pen. The animal's eyes rolled white with pain, her sides heaving with contractions that produced nothing. How long? Sarah asked, already kneeling beside the cow. Found her like this maybe 10 minutes ago. Something's wrong. Calf should have come by now. Jake's face was tight with worry. Lost 2 calves last spring to difficult births. Can't afford to lose this one too. Sarah ran her hands over the cow's distended belly, feeling the shape of the calf inside. Wrong. Everything about the position was wrong. She closed her eyes and let her training take over, remembering the emergency birth she had attended during the war. Human anatomy was different from bovine, but the principles remained the same. "It's breech," she said. "Calf's coming backward. She can't deliver it without help. Can you turn it?" Sarah met his eyes. "I can try, but it's going to hurt her, and there's no guarantee it'll work. If I can't get the calf repositioned, we'll lose them both." Jake's jaw clenched. "Do it." Sarah sent Emma running for her medical bag. While the girl was gone, she scrubbed her hands and arms with lye soap until they were raw. Emma returned breathless, and Sarah pulled out a bottle of carbolic acid, the same disinfectant she had used on countless surgical wounds. "Hold her head," Sarah told Jake. "Talk to her, keep her calm." Jake knelt by the cow's head, stroking the broad forehead and murmuring softly. The tenderness in his voice surprised Sarah. This hard, closed-off man who barely spoke to people transformed completely when dealing with animals. She filed that observation away for later consideration. Sarah's hands found the calf's hindquarters first. Just as she had feared, the legs were folded wrong, impossible to deliver without intervention. She worked carefully, fingers searching for purchase, trying to manipulate the unborn animal into a position that might allow birth. The cow bellowed and thrashed. Jake held her steady voice, never wavering in that low, soothing murmur. Time lost meaning. Sarah's entire world narrowed to the feeling of tissue and bone beneath her hands, the desperate need to save both lives. Sweat dripped into her eyes. Her shoulders screamed from the awkward position. She felt something shift, adjusted her grip, pushed and pulled with all the strength she had. The calf's legs straightened, found the birth canal. Sarah withdrew her hands and held her breath. The cow pushed. Once, twice. On the third contraction, the calf slid free in a rush of fluid and membrane. It lay motionless on the straw. "No," Jake breathed. Sarah was already moving. She cleared the calf's mouth and nose, rubbed its chest vigorously with straw. Nothing. She thought of all the soldiers she had lost, all the time she had been too slow or too late. Thought of Martin dying in his chair while she walked away. Not this time. Not again. She put her mouth over the calf's nostrils and blew. Once, twice. Felt tiny ribs expand under her hands. Blew again. The calf coughed, gasped, drew in a shuddering breath on its own. Jake made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. The mother cow lifted her head, already lowing softly to her baby. Sarah sat back on her heels, covered in birth fluids and exhausted beyond measure, and watched the calf struggle to stand on spindly legs. "You did it," Jake said, voice rough. "You saved them both." Sarah looked down at her, shaking hands. "I've delivered babies before, human babies, but never like this. I wasn't sure it would work, but you tried anyway." Jake stood, held out his hand to help her up. Sarah stared at that outstretched hand, remembering their agreement. No touching unless necessary. But his eyes held nothing but respect and gratitude, so she took it. His grip was warm and calloused and solid. He pulled her to her feet with easy strength, and for a moment they stood close enough that Sarah could see gold flecks in his gray eyes. Close enough to notice the way he smelled of leather and hay and honest sweat. Close enough that something shifted in the air between them, some awareness that went beyond their careful arrangement. Jake dropped her hand like it had burned him, stepped back. "You should clean up. I'll watch these two, make sure the calf nurse is proper." Sarah nodded suddenly, unable to speak. She gathered her supplies and retreated to the cabin where Emma waited with eyes wide and worried. "Is the baby cow okay?" the girl asked. "The baby cow is perfect." Sarah stripped off her soiled clothes, dunked her hands in the wash basin. "Your uncle was right to call me." Another hour, and we would have lost them both. Emma processed this information with the seriousness she brought to everything. "Uncle Jake says you're worth more than $8 a month. He says you're worth your weight in gold." Heat crept up Sarah's neck. He was exaggerating. He doesn't exaggerate. He says exactly what he means always. Emma tilted her head. "Do you like Uncle Jake?" The question came from nowhere, landed like a stone in still water. "Of course I like him. He's been very kind to us." "No, I mean, do you like him the way married people are supposed to like each other? Because you don't kiss or hold hands or any of the things I've seen other married people do." Sarah sighed and sat down, pulling Emma onto her lap. Despite the girl's insistence, she was too old for such things. "Your uncle and I have an arrangement. Remember, I help with the ranch. He gives me a place to stay. The marriage is just for appearances." But what if it wasn't just for appearances? What if it was real? What if indeed? Sarah pushed the thought away. Your uncle loved your Aunt Rebecca very much. When someone loves that deeply and loses them, sometimes their heart doesn't have room to love anyone else. What about your heart? Does it have room? Sarah thought about Martin, about 4 years of flinching at sudden movements, of measuring words carefully to avoid setting off explosions, about the relief she had felt watching him drink that morphine-laced whiskey. "I don't know, sweetheart. I honestly don't know." That night at dinner, Jake was quieter than usual. He ate mechanically, eyes distant. When Emma went to bed, he finally spoke. "What you did today, that was remarkable." Sarah shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "It's what I'm trained for." "No," Jake shook his head. "Training teaches you what to do. What you have is something else. You see a problem and you solve it, no hesitation. You don't give up, even when it looks hopeless." He paused, choosing words carefully. "I've been thinking, $8 a month isn't fair compensation for what you bring to this ranch." "We agreed on $8. We agreed before I knew what you were capable of, before I saw you turn a breech calf and save both lives, before I watched you teach Emma to read and treat sick animals and manage this household like you were born to it." Jake met her eyes. "I'm raising it to $12. No arguments." $12. Sarah's throat tightened. With that money she could save, could plan for a future beyond this temporary arrangement, could maybe someday stop looking over her shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me. You've earned every penny and more." Jake stood, carried his plate to the basin. "I'm going to check on the calf one more time before bed." He left, and Sarah sat alone in the lamplight, turning their conversation over in her mind. Something had shifted today. Some invisible line had been crossed when she had taken his hand in the barn. The careful distance they had maintained was crumbling, replaced by something neither of them seemed ready to name. The next day, Jake announced they needed to go to town for supplies. Sarah's stomach clenched with familiar anxiety, but she kept her expression neutral. Hoskins was getting bolder with his questions. Last time he had mentioned seeing a wanted poster that reminded him of someone, though he couldn't quite place who. They loaded the wagon in tense silence. Emma chattered about wanting to see if the store had gotten any new books, but both adults were too preoccupied to respond. As they crested the hill overlooking Prescott, Jake pulled the horses to a stop. "There's 3 men at the general store," he said quietly. "Strangers. One of them's wearing a military coat." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "Can you see their faces?" "Not from here." Jake studied the town below. "Could be nothing. Travelers passing through. Or it could be someone looking for you." "We should go back." "Running will just make you look guilty if they're already asking questions." Jake's voice was calm, practical. "We go in like normal. You stay quiet, let me do the talking. If things go sideways, you get back to the wagon and wait. I'll handle it." Sarah wanted to argue, to insist she could handle her own problems. But the steadiness in Jake's voice, the absolute certainty that he would protect her, made the words die on her lips. When had she last had someone willing to stand between her and danger? They rode into town. The 3 strangers were indeed at the general store talking to Hoskins. As the wagon drew closer, Sarah got a clear look at the man in the military coat and felt the bottom drop out of her world. Colonel Vincent Drake, Martin's commanding officer and closest friend. A man who had been at their wedding, who had seen Martin's fists and chosen to look away. A man who would recognize Sarah Hartford on sight. "That's him," Sarah breathed. "The one in the blue coat. He knew Martin, knew me." Jake's hands tightened on the reins. "Does he know you're out west?" "I don't know. Maybe. The telegram said I was wanted for questioning. They must have traced my route somehow." "All right." Jake's voice stayed level despite the tension radiating from him. "We play this calm. You're Sarah Brennan now, born and raised in Missouri, came west after your family died. We met through a mail-order arrangement, married 6 weeks ago. Stick to that story no matter what he says." They pulled up to the store. Drake turned at the sound of the wagon, and Sarah saw the exact moment recognition flickered in his eyes. He knew. Despite the different name and the wedding ring and Jake's protective presence, Drake knew exactly who she was. "Well now," Drake said, voice smooth as oil. "What a surprise finding you here, Mrs. Hartford." Jake stepped between them immediately. "Your mistaken friend. This is my wife, Sarah Brennan." Drake's smile was cold. "Is that what she told you, Sarah? I must say I'm disappointed. Running away, changing your name, hiding behind some ranch hand. It's beneath you." "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah said, proud that her voice stayed steady. "My name is Sarah Brennan. I've never met you before in my life." "Really?" Drake pulled a folded paper from his coat. A wanted poster, Sarah's face sketched in crude but recognizable detail. "Then how do you explain this wanted for questioning and the death of Colonel Martin Hartford, last seen boarding a westbound train in Philadelphia? Height, age, description, all match you perfectly." Hoskins was watching avidly, clearly delighted by the drama. The two men with Drake shifted their positions, hands drifting toward the guns at their hips. Sarah's mind raced through options, finding none that ended well. Then Jake spoke, voice hard as iron. "I don't care what your poster says. This woman is my wife. We were married by Reverend Davis 6 weeks ago. You want a question that you take it up with him." "A marriage performed under a false name is no marriage at all," Drake countered. "I'm authorized by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to bring Sarah Hartford back to face justice for her husband's death. You can cooperate, or you can be charged with harboring a fugitive." "On whose authority you're a long way from Pennsylvania, Colonel. Wyoming doesn't take kindly to outsiders throwing their weight around." Jake's hand moved casually to rest on the rifle at his side. "And I don't take kindly to men threatening my family." The tension ratcheted higher. Emma, sensing danger, despite not understanding it, pressed against Sarah's side. Sarah put a protective arm around the girl, mind spinning. She could run, but where? She could fight. But against 3 armed men, she could surrender and hope for mercy. But she had learned long ago that mercy was a luxury men like Drake didn't offer women like her. Sheriff Bradley chose that moment to emerge from his office across the street. He took in the scene with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Problem here, gentlemen." Drake turned to him with obvious relief. "Sheriff, I'm Colonel Vincent Drake here on official business from Pennsylvania. This woman is wanted for questioning in a murder investigation. I need you to take her into custody until arrangements can be made for her transport east." Bradley's gaze moved to Sarah, then to Jake. "That true, Jake. Your wife wanted for murder. That poster's got the wrong person." "Sheriff, my wife's name is Sarah Brennan, born Sarah Mitchell in Missouri. We met through a mail order arrangement and married legal 6 weeks back. Reverend Davis performed the ceremony himself." "Interesting." Bradley scratched his jaw. "Because Hoskins here mentioned seeing a wanted poster a few weeks back. Said the woman looked like Jake's new wife, but he wasn't sure. Now here comes a colonel from back east making the same claim." He turned to Drake. "You got proof this is the same woman, beyond a sketch, that could be any brown-haired female between 20 and 30. Drake's expression tightened. "I served with Martin Hartford for 15 years. I attended his wedding to this woman. I know her face as well as my own." "Funny thing about faces," Bradley said slowly. "People see what they expect to see. You come out here looking for a specific woman, every brown-haired stranger starts to look like her." He turned to Sarah. "Ma'am, you ever been to Philadelphia?" Sarah met his eyes. This was it. The moment that would determine everything. She could confess, could tell the truth, and hope for mercy. Or she could commit fully to the lie, trust that a small-town sheriff might value his community over some distant city's justice. "No, sir. I was born in Missouri, lost my parents to cholera when I was 18, spent 4 years working as a nurse before answering Mr. Brennan's advertisement for a wife. I've never been east of the Mississippi." "She's lying," Drake said flatly. "I can prove it. Sarah Hartford trained at Satterley Hospital in Philadelphia. She has a distinctive scar on her left forearm from a surgical accident. If she'll show her arms, we can settle this right now." Sarah's heart stopped. The scar. She had forgotten about the scar, a pale line where a scalpel had slipped during a difficult amputation. Proof positive of her identity, if Drake knew to look for it. Before she could react, Jake spoke. "My wife's got a scar on her arm, sure enough. Got it catching barbed wire while helping me mend fence her second week here. That proves she works hard, nothing more. Let me see it then, Drake demanded. Let me see this supposed fence wire scar. Sarah's mind raced. The surgical scar was distinctive, a clean straight line that no barbed wire accident would produce. If she showed it, Drake would have his proof. If she refused, it would look like she had something to hide. Emma solved the problem. The girl suddenly gasped and grabbed her stomach, doubling over with a very convincing cry of pain. "It hurts! Ma, it hurts!" Sarah dropped to her knees, immediately forgetting everything else. "Where, baby? Show me where." Emma pointed to her lower right abdomen, and Sarah's trained mind went immediately to appendicitis. She pressed gently, watching the girl's face. Emma winced theatrically, but there was something in her eyes. A plea, a message. She was faking. This brilliant, brave child was faking to save Sarah. Sarah played along. "We need to get her home. Now. This could be serious." "Convenient timing," Drake said coldly. "You want to stand here arguing while my niece might have appendicitis?" Jake's voice was deadly quiet. "You want to risk a child's life over a sketch that might look like someone you knew years ago?" Sheriff Bradley held up a hand. "All right, everyone, calm down. Jake, get your girl home. Have Doc Morrison look at her if you're worried." He turned to Drake. "Colonel, I appreciate you coming all this way, but I can't arrest someone on the strength of a resemblance. You want to pursue this, you'll need more than a wanted poster and a hunch. Until then, Mrs. Brennan is free to go about her business." Drake's face went rigid with fury. "This isn't over. That woman killed a decorated officer. I'll find proof, and when I do, you'll all be accessories to murder." "When you find proof, you come back and we'll talk," Bradley said evenly. "Until then, you're disturbing the peace. I suggest you move along." For a long moment, Drake stared at Sarah with cold hatred. Then he turned and stalked toward the horses hitched outside the saloon, his two companions following. They mounted and rode out of town at a gallop, leaving dust and tension in their wake. Sarah sagged against the wagon, holding Emma close. The girl was trembling now, the bravado fading into real fear. "Did I do good, Ma? You did perfect, sweetheart. So brave. So smart." Sarah kissed the top of Emma's head, not caring who saw. Jake helped them into the wagon, his movements tight with controlled fury. Sheriff Bradley approached as Jake gathered the reins. "Word of advice, Jake. That man's not going to give up easy. He's got the look of someone with a personal stake in this." Bradley's eyes found Sarah. "I don't know your story, ma'am, and I'm not sure I want to. But if there's truth to what Drake says, you might want to consider getting ahead of it, coming clean before he forces your hand." "There's nothing to come clean about," Sarah said. "I'm exactly who I say I am." Bradley nodded slowly. "All right then, you folks have a good day." They rode out of town in silence. Emma stayed pressed against Sarah's side, still shaking. Jake's jaw was clenched so tight Sarah could see the muscle jumping. They were a mile out before anyone spoke. "He knows," Jake said flatly. "Drake knows exactly who you are. He's going to dig until he finds proof, and when he does, he'll come back with a federal marshal and enough legal authority that Bradley won't be able to look the other way." "I know," Sarah's voice was hollow. "I should leave. Tonight. Before I bring more trouble down on you and Emma." "Don't be stupid." The harshness in Jake's tone startled her. "You leave, now you confirm everything Drake suspects. And where would you go? How far you think you'd get alone with 17 cents and a price on your head?" "Then what do you suggest?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking. When he spoke, his voice was calm again, decided. "We make this marriage real, not on paper, in truth. You stop being a hired hand living under my roof and become my actual wife, full partner in this ranch, legal claim to everything I own." Sarah stared at him. "Why would that help?" "Because a wife can't be forced to testify against her husband, and anything you tell me becomes privileged communication. Makes it harder for Drake to use me against you." Jake met her eyes. "More than that, it changes the story. Right now, you're a mail-order bride who happened to look like someone wanted for murder. But if we're a real married couple, if people see us as partners who chose each other, it becomes harder to believe you're some killer on the run. Jake, you don't have to do this. You don't owe me anything beyond the arrangement we already have." "This isn't about owing." Jake's voice softened slightly. "You saved my calf this morning. You're teaching Emma to read and giving her the mother she's been missing. You work harder than any hand I've ever hired and ask for nothing in return." He paused. "And Drake's not the only one with a personal stake in this. You think I'm going to stand by and let them drag you back east to hang for defending yourself against a man who beat you?" The word hang hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had been so focused on running, on hiding, that she hadn't let herself think about what would actually happen if they caught her. Pennsylvania still had the death penalty. Martin had been a decorated officer. She was a woman who had admitted to giving him morphine. The trial would be a formality. "I can't ask you to risk everything for me." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Jake pulled the wagon to a stop, turned to face her fully. "I liked being married to Rebecca, liked having a partner, someone to share the work and the worry and the small victories. When she died, I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd spend the rest of my days alone, except for Emma." He reached out slowly, giving Sarah time to pull away, and took her hand. The touch was gentle, respectful. Nothing like Martin's grabbing hands. "You've shown me I was wrong," Jake continued, "that maybe there's room for something new, different from what I had with Rebecca, but no less real. If you're willing to try, I'd like to make this marriage more than just a legal fiction." Sarah looked at their joined hands, at Emma, watching them with hopeful eyes, at the empty Wyoming landscape stretching endlessly around them, at this man who had pulled her from a blizzard and asked no questions and was now offering to stand between her and the gallows. "What does more than a legal fiction look like?" she asked quietly. "I don't know exactly. We figure it out as we go." Jake's thumb moved across her knuckles, a small gesture that sent warmth spreading through her. "But it starts with me moving out of the barn, with us sharing a bed even if all we do is sleep, with me introducing you as my wife and meaning it." Sarah thought about the nights she had lain awake in the cabin listening to the wind and wondering what it would feel like to have someone beside her. Not Martin with his unpredictable rages, but someone steady, someone safe. "I can't promise to love you," she said honestly. "I don't know if I remember how. I'm not asking for love. I'm asking for partnership, for trust, for the chance to build something real together." Jake squeezed her hand gently. "The rest, if it comes, can come in its own time." Emma bounced in her seat. "Does this mean you're going to be married for real, like kiss and everything?" Despite the tension, despite the fear still coiling in Sarah's chest, she felt her lips twitch. Maybe kiss and everything. Jake's eyes crinkled at the corners, the closest thing to a smile she had seen from him. "So is that a yes?" Sarah thought about all the reasons to say no, about the danger she was bringing to his door, about her own broken pieces and inability to trust, about the very real possibility that Drake would return with proof and a marshal and take her away in chains. Then she thought about Emma learning to read, about the calf taking its first shaky steps, about Jake's hand warm and solid in hers, offering safety without demands, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she deserved a second chance. "Yes," she said, "let's try." Then that night Jake moved his belongings from the barn to the cabin. It was a strange reversal of wedding night traditions. No romance, no anticipation, just a practical redistribution of space as Sarah cleared half the wardrobe and Jake awkwardly arranged his things. Emma watched the proceedings with barely contained glee. When it came time for bed, they faced each other across the narrow mattress like adversaries preparing for battle. Jake cleared his throat. "I sleep on my left side. Don't move around much." "I sleep on my right. Sometimes I have nightmares." "About the war. About Martin mostly. About the night I left." Sarah pulled the blanket up to her chin. "I dreamed that I stayed, that I didn't give him enough morphine, and he woke up while I was still there." Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he reached out slowly enough that Sarah could refuse and took her hand again. "You're safe here. I promise you that. Whatever comes, whatever Drake does, you're safe in this house." Sarah wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that promises meant anything in a world where her father had promised to always protect her and then died, where Martin had promised to love her and then used his fists instead. But the steadiness in Jake's voice, the warmth of his hand made her want to try. They lay in darkness, hands loosely joined between them. Sarah expected to lie awake for hours, hyper-aware of his presence. Instead, exhaustion pulled her under almost immediately. She slept deeper than she had in years. And when nightmares came, Jake's hand tightened on hers, and his voice murmured soft reassurances until she settled. She woke to dawn light and the realization that she had shifted in sleep, her head now resting on Jake's shoulder, his arm around her. She froze, waiting for panic. It didn't come. Instead, she felt safe. Protected. Two things she had thought she would never feel again with a man. Jake stirred, opened his eyes. For a moment they lay there, tangled together in ways that went beyond their agreement. Then he smiled, a real smile this time, and Sarah felt something in her chest crack open. "Morning, wife," he said softly. "Morning, husband." Emma burst through the door. "Are you awake? Can we have pancakes? I want to learn how to make them myself." The moment broke reality reasserting itself. But as Sarah rose to start breakfast, as Jake helped Emma mix batter while Sarah fried bacon, she felt the shape of their new normal taking form. Not perfect, not without complications, but real in a way nothing had been real for a very long time. They were finishing breakfast when they heard horses approaching, multiple horses moving fast. Jake stood immediately moved to the window. His face went hard. "Drake, he's back. Got 4 men with him this time, and one of them's wearing a marshal's badge." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "He found proof." "Maybe. Or maybe he's bluffing, hoping to scare you into confessing." Jake's mind was clearly racing planning. "Emma, go to your room. Sarah, let me handle this." "No." Sarah stood surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "I'm done running, done hiding. If Drake has proof, if this is the end, then I face it standing up." Jake looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Together then. But you let me talk first." They walked out onto the porch as the riders approached. Drake sat his horse with military precision satisfaction written across his face. The marshal was a hard-eyed man in his 50s, badge gleaming in the morning sun. "Marshal Carson," the man introduced himself. "I'm here on behalf of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania regarding the death of Colonel Martin Hartford. I'm looking for Sarah Hartford, also known as Sarah Mitchell." "There's no one here by that name," Jake said evenly. "Only my wife, Sarah Brennan, and our daughter, Emma." Drake pulled out a paper. "I have here a telegram from the hospital administrator at Satterley. Confirms that a Sarah Mitchell worked there from 1861 to 1865. Further confirms that she married Martin Hartford in 1866 and left Philadelphia in February of this year, shortly after his death." He fixed Sarah with a cold stare. "Still claiming you've never been to Philadelphia?" The walls were closing in. Sarah could feel the noose tightening. But before she could speak, a new voice cut through the tension. "Actually, Colonel, your information is incomplete." Sheriff Bradley rode up the path, and behind him came an unexpected figure, Reverend Davis clutching a worn Bible and a leather-bound register. "Reverend," Bradley said, "tell the marshal what you told me." Davis cleared his throat. "6 weeks ago, I married Jacob Brennan to Sarah Mitchell. She told me her parents had died of cholera in Missouri, that she had been working as a nurse in Kansas before coming west as a mail-order bride. The marriage was legal and binding. I have it recorded in my register with 2 witnesses." "A marriage performed under false pretenses," Drake interjected. "Was it?" Bradley's voice was mild. "The bride gave her birth name as Mitchell. That appears to be accurate based on your telegram. She married a Hartford later, but she's since married a Brennan. Seems to me a woman's entitled to use her birth name if she chooses." Drake's face reddened. "She's wanted for murder." "No, sir, she's wanted for questioning." "That's different." Bradley turned to the marshal. "Carson, with all due respect, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania doesn't have jurisdiction here. If you want to extradite Mrs. Brennan, you'll need evidence of a crime, not just questions about her late husband's death." Marshal Carson studied Sarah with shrewd eyes. "Ma'am, did you administer morphine to Martin Hartford on or about February 10th of this year?" Sarah's lawyer instincts warred with her need for truth. Finally, she nodded. "I gave him morphine in his evening whiskey. He had been drinking heavily, and I wanted him to sleep while I left the house. And he died from that morphine. So I was told via telegram, but I measured the dose carefully. It should have been enough to sedate him, nothing more. If he died, it's possible he drank more whiskey after I left, or took additional morphine himself. He had access to my medical supplies." It was a thin defense, and everyone knew it. But Carson's expression shifted slightly. "You're admitting you gave him the drug." "I'm admitting I helped him sleep so I could escape 4 years of beatings." Sarah's voice strengthened. "I have medical records from 3 different doctors documenting broken ribs, a fractured wrist, repeated bruising, consistent with domestic violence. I left because I feared for my life. If Martin died, it was by his own hand as much as mine." Drake made a disgusted sound. "Lies. Martin was a decorated officer, a respected man. This woman is fabricating abuse to justify murder." "Then how do you explain the medical records?" Bradley asked. "Accidents, falls, women are clumsy creatures." The contempt in Drake's voice was palpable. Sarah saw Jake's hands curl into fists, but he stayed silent, letting the legal dance play out. Marshal Carson pulled out his own papers. "I have here a deposition from Dr. Edwin Porter, Martin Hartford's personal physician. States he treated Mrs. Hartford for injuries on 7 separate occasions between 1867 and 1870. Each time she claimed to have fallen or walked into something. Each time Dr. Porter noted in his private records that the injuries were consistent with battery, not accidents." Drake's confidence wavered slightly. Porter would say anything if paid enough. "Dr. Porter is a respected physician with no connection to this case beyond treating the Hartfords," Carson said dryly. "I also have depositions from 3 neighbors who heard arguments, witnessed violence, saw Mrs. Hartford with visible injuries." He looked at Sarah. "Ma'am, I'm authorized to take you back to Philadelphia to answer questions, but based on what I've seen, I don't believe the Commonwealth has grounds for a murder charge. More likely, this will be ruled self-defense or accidental death." "And in the meantime," Jake asked, "while this sorts itself out legally, what happens to my wife? She'd be remanded to custody, pending investigation." "How long would that take?" Carson shrugged. "Months, maybe a year. Depends on how backed up the courts are." A year in jail while lawyers argued over whether she had the right to defend herself. Sarah's stomach turned over. She had survived war, survived Martin, survived a blizzard. Could she survive being caged? Jake stepped forward. "Marshal, what if we came to you? What if Sarah voluntarily traveled to Philadelphia, gave her statement, cooperated fully? Would that count in her favor?" "It might. Judges look more kindly on defendants who don't run." "I'm not running," Sarah said. "I never was. I was leaving an abusive marriage. There's a difference." Carson's expression softened fractionally. "For what it's worth, ma'am, I believe you, but I still have a job to do." He turned to Drake. "Colonel, I'm going to recommend to the Commonwealth that Mrs. Brennan be allowed to return voluntarily within 60 days to give a formal deposition. If she cooperates fully and the investigation supports her version of events, charges likely won't be filed." "That's unacceptable," Drake sputtered. "She killed Martin. Martin Hartford died with dangerous levels of morphine and alcohol in his system," Carson said flatly. "Whether his wife administered it or he took it himself, the coroner couldn't determine with certainty. Without proof of intent to kill, there's no murder case. Just a tragic accident involving a violent drunk and his abused wife." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Drake's face went through several shades of rage before settling on cold fury. "This isn't over. I'll see that woman hang if it takes the rest of my life." "You do that, Colonel." Carson's voice went hard. "But you do it through legal channels, not by harassing citizens in Wyoming. Am I clear?" Drake didn't answer, just wheeled his horse and galloped off, his men scrambling to follow. Carson tipped his hat to Sarah. "Ma'am, I'll be in touch regarding when to expect you in Philadelphia. I suggest you bring a lawyer." When the marshal had ridden away, Sheriff Bradley and Reverend Davis lingered. Bradley fixed Jake with a look. "You know what you're doing, getting in the middle of this, protecting my wife. That's what husbands do." Bradley nodded slowly. "Your wife's got 60 days of freedom left. I suggest you make the most of them." After they left, Sarah stood on the porch staring at nothing. 60 days. 2 months before she had to walk back into the life she had fled, face questions and accusations, and the very real possibility of a noose. Jake's hand found hers. "We'll figure this out. How you heard Carson. Even if they don't charge me with murder, the investigation could take a year, and Drake won't stop. He'll keep digging until he finds something to use against me. Then we give him nothing to find." Jake turned her to face him. We spend the next 60 days building the strongest case possible that you were defending yourself. We track down every doctor who treated you, every neighbor who witnessed Martin's violence. We document everything. And if it's not enough, then we run." Jake said it simply as if he was suggesting they plant a different crop. "Take Emma head to California or Oregon or somewhere Drake can't reach. Start over again under new names." Sarah stared at him. "You'd do that? Give up your ranch, your life here, just to protect me?" "Sarah!" Jake cupped her face in his rough hands. "You're my wife, my partner, the first person in 5 years who made me want to be alive instead of just existing. So yes, I'd give up everything to keep you safe." Before she could talk herself out of it, before fear could stop her, Sarah rose on her toes and kissed him. It was brief, chaste, nothing like the passion she had known with Martin in the early days before everything turned dark. But it was honest, real, a promise of something worth fighting for. When they broke apart, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "We'll get through this, all three of us, together." Inside the cabin, Emma pressed her face against the window, watching her aunt and uncle stand together against the world. For the first time in her young life, she understood what it meant to have a real family. Not people bound by blood or obligation, but by choice. By the decision to stand together when standing alone would be easier. The Wyoming wind picked up, carrying the scent of coming spring. 60 days stretched ahead, both endless and impossibly short. But as Sarah stood in Jake's arms with Emma watching from the window, she made herself a promise. Whatever came next, whatever Drake did, she would face it standing up. No more running, no more hiding. She had found something worth fighting for, and she would fight with everything she had. The days following Drake's departure carried the weight of borrowed time. Sarah threw herself into ranch work with fierce determination, as if motion alone could outrun the future bearing down on them. She cataloged every vial in her medical bag, scrubbed the cabin floors until they gleamed, taught Emma to read Shakespeare from Jake's battered copy of Hamlet. At night she lay beside her husband in their shared bed, their bodies learning the language of trust, one careful touch at a time. Jake recognized the frantic energy for what it was. Fear dressed up as productivity. He saw it in the tremor of Sarah's hands when she thought no one watched, heard it in her footsteps pacing the cabin long after midnight. But he also witnessed her courage, that iron core forged in war hospitals and brutal marriage, now preparing to face one final battle. 3 weeks after Marshall Carson rode away with his promises and deadlines, a letter arrived that changed the trajectory of everything. Jake collected it from town with unsteady hands, and they opened it together at the kitchen table while Emma traced letters on her slate, pretending not to listen. The letter bore a Philadelphia law firm's letterhead. Theodore Whitmore, attorney at law, specialized in defending women accused of crimes against violent husbands. Someone anonymous had retained his services on Sarah's behalf, someone who had read newspaper accounts of her case and felt compelled to intervene. He wants depositions from everyone who witnessed Martin's violence. Sarah read, her voice catching on certain words. "Medical records dating back to our wedding. Character witnesses who can testify about my war service. He believes if we establish a clear pattern of abuse, the prosecution might decline to file charges at all." Jake studied the elegant script. Who retained him, the letter doesn't say. Sarah scanned the pages again, shaking her head. "Just that a concerned party read about my situation and felt justice required proper legal representation." Emma looked up from her slate eyes, solemn beyond her 8 years. "Maybe God sent help, like he sent you to find Ma in the blizzard." "Maybe he did, sweetheart," Sarah murmured, reaching across to squeeze the girl's small hand. That evening they began the painful work of documentation. Sarah forced herself to remember what she had spent years trying to forget, writing down dates and details, with hands that grew less steady as the list lengthened. Jake remained beside her throughout, a silent anchor, keeping her from drowning in the memories. February 3rd, 1868. Martin returned from the officers' club intoxicated. I had overcooked the roast. He fractured 2 ribs in my left wrist. Dr. Porter set the bones and suggested I exercise more caution in the kitchen. Jake read over her shoulder, his breathing gone careful and controlled. Porter knew. He documented injuries and said nothing. Women were considered property then. Many still are. Sarah set down her pen, flexing cramped fingers. The law viewed Martin as a decorated officer with an accident-prone wife. The burden of proof always fell on me. You shouldn't have borne that burden alone. Someone should have protected you. Someone did? Sarah met his gray eyes directly. You pulled me from a blizzard when you could have left me to freeze. You gave me sanctuary without demanding explanations. You protected me when Drake came hunting. Jake captured her hand, brought it to his lips. And I'll continue protecting you, for as long as breath remains in my body. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken promises. Sarah found herself cataloging details she had been too frightened to notice before, the silver threading through Jake's dark hair, the calluses on his palms earned through honest labor, the steady rise and fall of his chest, the rhythm that had become her lullaby these past weeks. Emma's exaggerated yawn shattered the spell. If you're planning to kiss, I should retire to my room. I'm old enough to recognize romantic tension. Heat flooded Sarah's cheeks. Emma, I'm merely observing facts. You did kiss after Drake left. I witnessed it through the window. Emma gathered her slate with dignified precision. And Uncle Jake has been watching you the way the barn cat watches her kittens, protective and possessive simultaneously. After Emma disappeared behind her bedroom door, awkward silence settled over the kitchen. Jake cleared his throat. She's not mistaken about how I watch you. Sarah's pulse quickened. No. These past weeks, witnessing you face Drake's accusations, seeing you choose to fight rather than flee. Jake paused, selecting words with obvious care. You're the bravest person I've encountered, Sarah. And somewhere during this arrangement, my feelings evolved beyond the practical. Into what? Something real. Different from what I shared with Rebecca, but no less profound. With her, I was young and certain about everything. With you, I'm older and certain about nothing except wanting you to stay. Not because Emma needs you or the ranch requires your skills, but because I need you. Sarah's throat constricted. I don't know if I can give you what you deserve. Martin damaged something fundamental in me, the parts that understand loving without terror. Then we'll repair them together. Jake reached out, tucking an errant strand of hair behind her ear with devastating gentleness. No pressure, no expectations, just two broken people learning wholeness again. Sarah leaned into his touch, permitting herself this trust. What if Philadelphia keeps me? What if they imprison me, and years pass before I return? Then I wait, however long necessity demands. That's unfair to you, bound to a woman you can barely have. Sarah, Jake's tone allowed no argument. I spent 5 years shackled to grief and guilt. At least with you, hope exists. Hope that you'll return. Hope we'll build an actual marriage, an actual life. That's more than I possessed since Rebecca died. Unable to resist, Sarah kissed him. Not the frightened brush of lips from before, but something deeper, something tasting of trust and possibility, and the terrifying vulnerability of lowering one's defenses. Jake responded with exquisite care, letting her control the pace, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. When they separated, both breathless, Sarah whispered, I think I'm falling in love with you. It terrifies me. Good terrified or bad terrified? Uncertain, possibly both. Jake smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. I can work with both. The following morning delivered unexpected visitors. Sheriff Bradley rode up accompanied by a woman Sarah didn't recognize. Perhaps 60, impeccably dressed with observant eyes that absorbed every detail. Mrs. Brennan, Bradley announced. This is Mrs. Margaret Collins. She claims to possess information relevant to your case. Sarah invited them inside, pulse hammering. Margaret Collins, the boarding house proprietor who had witnessed her hasty wedding to Jake. What could she possibly know about Martin? Mrs. Collins settled at the table, accepting offered tea with gracious appreciation. Then she spoke words that altered everything. I worked at Satterley Hospital during the war, 1863 through 1865. Supervised the surgical ward. She looked directly at Sarah. I remember you, one of our finest nurses. Steady hands, sharp mind, never flinched regardless of the horror. Sarah's thoughts reeled. I don't recall you. So many supervisors passed through. No reason you should remember me. I primarily handled administrative duties. but I remember you because of an incident in spring 1865. Mrs. Collins's expression grew grave. A young officer came through our ward, Colonel Martin Hartford, shrapnel to the leg, not life-threatening. You treated him with the same professionalism you showed everyone. Sarah's blood turned cold. I don't remember treating Martin during the war. He remained only 2 days before transfer to officer housing, but I remember how he looked at you, possessive, predatory. It disturbed me profoundly. Mrs. Collins paused. Months later, I heard you'd married him. I wanted to warn you about the deadness in that man's eyes, but who was I to interfere? So I remained silent. Why tell me now? Because I read newspaper accounts of your case. Colonel Drake claiming you murdered a loving husband. I knew that was fabrication. Mrs. Collins extracted papers from her bag. I kept detailed journals during the war. Every patient, every incident. I located the entry about Hartford's stay. I documented my concerns about him specifically. She slid a yellowed journal across the table. Sarah read the entry dated April 1865, written in precise script. Colonel Martin Hartford admitted for shrapnel extraction. Surgery successful. Patient stable but temperament deeply concerning. Displays controlling behavior toward nursing staff, particularly Miss Mitchell. Recommends she not be assigned to his care again. Something profoundly wrong with this man. This was written before we married, Sarah breathed. This proves you recognized warning signs in him. It proves you weren't the only person who understood Martin Hartford was dangerous, Mrs. Collins corrected. I prepared a deposition for your attorney, Mr. Whitmore. I'll testify that Hartford exhibited violent tendencies before your marriage, that his behavior toward you was predatory from initial contact. Jake had been standing silently near the door. Now he stepped forward. Why travel all this distance to help someone you barely remember? Mrs. Collins's eyes blazed with fierce conviction. Because I've carried 20 years of regret for my silence. Because I watched that young nurse marry a man I knew was dangerous and did nothing. Because perhaps if I'd spoken then, she wouldn't have endured 4 years of brutality. So I'm speaking now. Better late than never. After Mrs. Collins departed, Sarah sat staring at the journal entry. Physical evidence that someone else had perceived Martin's true nature before she bound herself to him. It wouldn't prove she hadn't administered morphine, but it established a pattern. Would demonstrate to judges and juries that she hadn't fabricated abuse to justify murder. The pieces are assembling, Jake said quietly. Medical records, neighbor testimonies, now this. Drake will struggle to paint you as a calculating killer when so many witnesses knew Martin's reality. Unless he discovers something else, some additional proof that I intended Martin's death. Sarah's hands trembled around her teacup, because part of me did intend it, Jake. Maybe I didn't measure a certainly lethal dose, but I hoped. God forgive me, I hoped I'd given him enough that I'd never face him again. Hoping someone dies isn't equivalent to murdering them, isn't it? When you're a trained nurse who understands exactly how much morphine proves fatal. Jake knelt beside her chair, capturing both her hands. Sarah listened carefully. You survived 4 years of torment. You escaped using the only method available. If Martin died, it was because he was a violent alcoholic who combined opiates and whiskey. That's his responsibility, not yours. The law might disagree. Then we make them agree. Jake's voice carried steel. We have 6 weeks remaining. We utilize every day building the strongest possible defense. And if it proves insufficient, if they attempt imprisonment anyway, we run, take Emma, and vanish into territories where Drake can never locate us. Sarah searched his face. You'd truly sacrifice everything. Your ranch, your home, your entire existence. I'd sacrifice anything to protect you and Emma. You're my family now. Family defends each other. The word family settled in Sarah's chest like a warm coal. She had lost her blood family years ago, endured a mockery of family with Martin. But this chosen family, built on trust and partnership and deepening love, this was authentic in ways nothing else had been. I love you, she said, the words surprising her with their certainty. I don't know precisely when it happened, but I do. I love you, Jake Brennan. Jake's eyes grew bright. Say it again. I love you. He kissed her, then thorough and promising and full of tomorrow. When they separated, he pressed his forehead to hers. I love you too. Have for weeks now. Just been too stubborn to voice it. That night their marriage became real in every dimension. Sarah came to Jake without fear, without Martin's violence poisoning each touch. Jake was patient and reverent and gentle, treating her like something infinitely precious. Afterward, wrapped in his arms, Sarah experienced peace she hadn't known was achievable. Regardless of what happens in Philadelphia, she whispered into darkness, I want you to know this was real. These weeks with you and Emma were the most genuine thing in my life. They're not finished yet, Jake said. We still have time. But time, as circumstances revealed, was a luxury they possessed less of than anticipated. 4 days later, Jake returned from town wearing a grim expression. Drake's returned, at the saloon since afternoon, drinking and interrogating anyone who'll listen. Hoskins reports he's attempting to gather evidence, find someone who'll claim you confessed to murder or demonstrated premeditation. Sarah's newfound tranquility evaporated. What do? We confront him. Together. Jake's expression was granite. He's trying intimidation, hoping to make you flee so he can claim you're evading justice. We deny him that satisfaction. They found Drake at the saloon that evening, surrounded by empty glasses and the type of men who'd sell their grandmother for whiskey money. When Sarah and Jake entered, conversation died. Every eye turned toward them. Drake stood unsteadily. Well, the murderess and her protector. Come to beg for mercy. Come to inform you that you're wasting effort, Sarah replied, surprised by her steady voice. I'm returning to Philadelphia in 5 weeks. I'll provide my deposition and answer every question the Commonwealth poses. You don't need to harass my family. Family, Drake spat the word like poison. You believe marrying some ranch hand grants you respectability? You remain a killer, Sarah, still the woman who murdered my closest friend. Martin was many things, but he wasn't your friend. He was your commanding officer who drank himself into nightly violence. Sarah stepped forward, Jake, a solid presence at her back. And I didn't murder him. I defended myself using the only avenue available. By poisoning him in his sleep like a coward. By escaping before he could kill me, as he'd threatened countless times. Sarah's voice rose. You knew what he was, Colonel. You witnessed the bruises, heard him rage when intoxicated. You knew, and you did nothing. Something flickered across Drake's features. Guilt, perhaps, or fury at being exposed. Martin had his demons. War does that to men. But he loved you. He owned me. There's a fundamental difference. Sarah held Drake's gaze. And now he's dead, and I'm alive, and no amount of your guilt about failing to help him with those demons will alter what occurred. The accusation hung between them like gun smoke. Drake's face cycled through red to white. You don't understand anything, don't I? You were his friend, his commanding officer. You could have gotten him help, could have forced him to stop drinking, insisted he see a doctor for the nightmares and rage. But you didn't. You let him spiral and take out his violence on the one person who couldn't fight back. So tell me, Colonel, who bears true responsibility for Martin Hartford's death? Drake lunged forward. Jake intercepted him instantly, one hand catching the colonel's collar. Touch my wife, and you'll live to regret it. For endless seconds, the two men stood locked together, violence crackling between them. Then Sheriff Bradley's voice sliced through the tension. Enough, Drake, you're intoxicated and disturbing the peace. Time to leave. She killed him, Drake said, but the fire had died from his voice. She killed Martin, and she'll pay. Maybe she will, maybe she won't. Courts will decide that. Bradley's hand rested on his weapon. But right now you're returning to the boarding house to sleep this off. Tomorrow you're boarding a train back to Philadelphia. You want justice, you wait for Mrs. Brennan to provide her deposition as promised. Drake shook off Jake's grip, straightening his coat with trembling hands. This isn't finished. It is for tonight, Bradley said firmly. After Drake departed under deputy escort, the saloon gradually resumed normal operations. But Sarah felt the weight of watching eyes, heard whispered speculation. The entire town knew now. Knew she faced murder accusations, knew she was traveling east to confront them. Jake guided her outside into cool evening air. You all right? I accused him publicly, told him he bore equal responsibility for Martin's death. Sarah laughed shakily. I don't know where that courage originated. It came from strength, from truth. Jake pulled her close. You faced him down, Sarah. Didn't flinch, didn't retreat. I've never been prouder. They rode home through darkness, each lost in contemplation. Emma was asleep when they arrived, watched over by Mrs. Collins, who had volunteered to stay. The older woman took one look at their expressions and asked no questions, just gathered her belongings and departed with a promise to check on them tomorrow. Sarah and Jake stood in the cabin, the gravity of approaching events settling over them like snowfall. 5 weeks until departure. 5 weeks to prepare Emma for the possibility Sarah might not return. 5 weeks to create memories that would sustain them through whatever separation came. "Make love to me," Sarah said suddenly. "I need to feel alive, need to feel something beyond fear." Jake required no further invitation. He carried her to their bed and worshipped her with hands and mouth, driving away shadows until all she knew was pleasure and connection, and the fierce joy of being chosen, of being loved. Afterward they lay tangled together, and Sarah permitted herself to imagine futures where this was every night, where she returned from Philadelphia cleared of all charges, and they built a life together, where Emma grew up safe and loved, where the past finally released its stranglehold. It was a beautiful dream. Sarah clung to it desperately. The following weeks were bittersweet. Sarah divided her time between Philadelphia preparations and simply living. She taught Emma everything possible about nursing and healing, showed Jake how to mix the tinctures and poultices she used for treating sick livestock, wrote out recipes and household instructions for her absence. Nights she and Jake loved each other with increasing urgency, as if they could somehow store sufficient passion to last through separation. They discussed everything and nothing. The ranch he wanted to expand, children they might have someday, the life they would build when this concluded. If it ever concluded. 3 weeks before Sarah's scheduled departure, a telegram arrived from Theodore Whitmore. He had interviewed Dr. Porter, who confirmed treating every injury Sarah had documented. He possessed depositions from 5 neighbors testifying to violence emanating from the Hartford home. He had Mrs. Collins's journal and sworn statement. The case was strong, he wrote, strong enough that the prosecutor was considering declining to file charges entirely, but complications existed. Colonel Drake had filed a wrongful death suit in civil court. Even if Sarah escaped criminal charges, she could face civil litigation dragging on for years. And Drake possessed resources, connections. He wouldn't cease until he destroyed her completely. "He can't release it," Sarah said, staring at the telegram. "Can't accept that Martin's death was anything except my fault." "Because accepting that would require accepting his own culpability," Jake observed. "Easier blaming you than confronting the fact that he enabled Martin's alcoholism and violence for years." Sarah reached a decision then. Difficult, but necessary. "I'm offering him a settlement. Money in exchange for dropping the civil suit." "You don't possess that kind of money." "No, but I have something else." Sarah's voice steadied. "I have the Hartford estate. Martin left everything to me. 2,000 acres of farmland outside Philadelphia, plus substantial investments. It's worth a fortune." Jake stared. "You'd surrender all that? It's blood money. Every acre purchased with Martin's military pension, every dollar invested came from his family fortune. I don't want it." Sarah's hands clenched. "But Drake does. He's been attempting to control the Hartford land since Martin died. That's what this truly concerns. Not justice, not revenge. Money and property. You give him that land, you'll have nothing. I'll have you. I'll have Emma. I'll have my freedom." Sarah met his eyes. "That's worth more than every acre in Pennsylvania." The letter to Drake was brief and businesslike. Sarah would sign over the entire Hartford estate in exchange for dropping all civil claims and ceasing his pursuit of criminal charges. She would provide a comprehensive deposition detailing Martin's abuse, then walk away from Philadelphia forever. Drake could have the land, the money, everything, if he would simply let her go. His response arrived within a week. Drake accepted. Sarah should have felt relief. Instead, she felt hollow. The estate had been her insurance, her safety net if circumstances deteriorated. Now she would return to Wyoming with nothing except the clothes on her back and the life she'd built with Jake. "It's sufficient," Jake said when she confessed her fears. "More than sufficient. We don't need Hartford money. We'll build something of our own." The day before Sarah's scheduled departure, the town held its annual harvest dance, marking the end of planting season. Jake suggested skipping it given the circumstances, but Sarah insisted on attending. "I want one normal evening," she said. "One night where we're simply a married couple dancing with our daughter." "Is that too much to ask?" They went. The entire town crowded into the church hall, decorated with wildflowers and bunting. A fiddle player provided music. Women had brought enough food to feed an army. It should have been festive, but Sarah felt the weight of watching eyes. Heard the whispered speculation. Murderess. Killer. The woman who poisoned her husband. Jake kept her close, his hand firm on her waist. Emma danced between them, oblivious to undercurrents. When the fiddle player struck up a waltz, Jake pulled Sarah into his arms. "Ignore them," he murmured. "Dance with me as if we're the only people existing." Sarah let herself be led, let the music carry them. Jake was surprisingly graceful, moving with easy confidence despite his rancher's build. For 3 minutes they existed in a bubble of their own creation. Just a man and his wife swaying together, building memories to sustain them through separation. When the song ended, Reverend Davis approached. "Mrs. Brennan, might I speak with you?" They stepped outside into cool evening air. Davis looked uncomfortable. "I wanted you to know I've written a letter on your behalf, testifying to your character, the work you've accomplished with Emma and the ranch. I'll send it to the Philadelphia court." Emotion constricted Sarah's throat. "Thank you, Reverend. That means more than you can know. I've also spoken with several congregation members. We've taken up a collection for your travel expenses and legal fees." He pressed a small purse into her hands. "It's not much, but it should help." Sarah opened the purse and gasped. Over $100 in bills and coins, a fortune for a small town like Prescott. "I can't accept this." "You can and you will. You're one of us now, Sarah. We protect our own." When they returned to the dance, Mrs. Collins was waiting with Emma. The older woman's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I'm accompanying you," Mrs. Collins announced, "to Philadelphia. I'll testify personally if required, and I'll ensure you're not alone through this ordeal." "You don't have to do that." "I know, but I'm doing it regardless." Mrs. Collins took Sarah's hands. "You gave me an opportunity to atone for past silence. Let me see it through." The kindness was overwhelming. Sarah had spent so long believing she was alone that the world was populated by people like Martin and Drake who would harm her without hesitation. But here was evidence to the contrary. Here were people who recognized her worth, who believed in her innocence, who were willing to fight for her. That night, lying in Jake's arms for what might be the final time in months, Sarah permitted herself to cry, not from fear, but from gratitude, from the overwhelming knowledge that whatever happened in Philadelphia, she was loved. She was believed. She was not alone. "Come back to me," Jake whispered into her hair. "Whatever it requires, however long it takes, come back to me." "I will," Sarah promised. "I swear I will." The morning of departure arrived with cruel swiftness. Jake drove her to the train station, Emma wedged between them on the wagon seat. The girl had been unusually subdued, finally comprehending that this goodbye might extend longer than anyone wanted to admit. Mrs. Collins already waited on the platform with her trunk. Sheriff Bradley was there too, and Reverend Davis and a dozen townspeople who had come to see Sarah off. It was more support than she'd dared hope for, more acceptance than she'd thought possible. Jake helped her down from the wagon, held her close for a long moment. 2 months, he said. That's Whitmore's estimate. 2 months, and you'll be home. 2 months, Sarah echoed, trying to believe it. Emma threw her arms around Sarah's waist. You have to return. You promised to teach me apple pie and full delivery and 100 other things. I will, sweetheart, I promise. Sarah knelt to meet Emma's eyes. And while I'm gone, you care for your uncle. Make sure he eats properly and doesn't overwork himself. I will. Emma's voice was small, frightened. Ma, you're going to be all right, aren't you? They won't hurt you, Sarah couldn't lie. I don't know what will happen, Emma, but I'm going to fight with everything I possess to return home to you and your uncle. That's a promise I can make. The train whistle blew. Sarah stood turned to Jake. So much she wanted to say, but the words wouldn't form. Instead, she pulled something from her pocket, the gold wedding band he'd given her, Rebecca's ring. Keep this for me, she said. When I return, you can place it on my finger again. A reminder that I'm yours and you're mine. Jake's hands shook as he accepted the ring. Sarah, I can't lose you. Not after finally finding you. You won't. She kissed him, fierce and desperate and full of promise. I love you, Jacob Brennan. I'll love you every day I'm gone, and I'll fight my way back to you regardless of what stands in my way. I love you too, Jake's voice fractured. More than I knew I could love anyone again. Mrs. Collins touched Sarah's arm gently. The train, dear. We must board. Sarah forced herself to step back to collect her bag. One final look at Jake and Emma, standing on the platform clutching each other like storm survivors. Then she climbed aboard the train, found a window seat. As the train pulled away, she watched them diminish. Watched Jake raise his hand in farewell. Watched Emma wave frantically until they were just specks in the distance, then nothing at all. Sarah turned forward toward Philadelphia and whatever awaited there. Beside her, Mrs. Collins squeezed her hand. Courage, dear. We'll see this through together. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the obstruction in her throat. She thought about Whitmore's letter in her bag outlining their strategy, about the depositions and evidence they'd gathered, about Drake's agreement to settle in exchange for the Hartford estate. The train carried her east through landscapes growing gradually familiar. Prairies yielded to farmland. Small frontier towns became larger cities. With every mile, Sarah felt the weight of her old life pressing down on her. The fear that had driven her west in the first place now pulling her back toward its source. Mrs. Collins dozed beside her. Other passengers came and went, oblivious to the drama playing out in Sarah's mind. She watched America roll past the window and made herself a promise. Whatever happened in Philadelphia, whatever Drake attempted, whatever the courts decided, she would survive. She had survived war, had survived Martin, had survived a blizzard that should have killed her. She would survive this too. And then she would go home. The deposition room was smaller than anticipated. Just a table, several chairs, a stenographer to record every word. Theodore Whitmore sat on Sarah's right, Mrs. Collins on her left. Across from them, Colonel Drake and the prosecutor, a thin man named Harrison, who appeared deeply uncomfortable. Mrs. Brennan, Harrison began, please state for the record your full name and relationship to the deceased. Sarah Mitchell Brennan, formerly Sarah Mitchell Hartford. I was married to Colonel Martin Hartford from June 1866 until his death in February 1883. And you're here voluntarily to provide testimony regarding the circumstances of his death. I am. Harrison consulted his notes. Please describe the events of February 10, 1883. Sarah drew breath, feeling Whitmore's steadying presence beside her, and began. She told them everything, about 4 years of beatings, about broken bones and split lips and terror that had become her daily existence, about the morphine she'd accumulated bottle by bottle planning her escape, about mixing it into Martin's whiskey while he snored in his chair. I measured the dose carefully, Sarah said, her voice unwavering despite the memories. 3 grains, sufficient to ensure deep sleep for 6 to 8 hours, not enough to prove lethal independently. But combined with the alcohol he'd already consumed, Harrison prompted, the risk increased substantially. I understood that. But Martin drank heavily every night. I couldn't wait for sobriety because those nights didn't exist. Sarah met Drake's eyes across the table. I needed time to pack my belongings and reach the train station. I needed him unconscious long enough that he couldn't prevent my departure. Did you check his vital signs after administering the morphine? No. Did you attempt to wake him before leaving? No. Did you leave any note or message indicating you'd given him a sedative? No. Sarah's voice hardened. Because if he'd woken and discovered me still there, he would have killed me. He'd threatened to do so repeatedly. The last time was 2 days before I left. He said if I ever attempted to leave him, he'd snap my neck like a chicken and claim I'd fallen down the stairs. Drake made a disgusted sound. Fabrications, all of it. Martin loved you. Martin owned me, Sarah corrected, voice sharp. There's a fundamental difference, Colonel, though I don't expect you to comprehend it. Harrison raised a hand. Mrs. Brennan, in your professional medical opinion, was the dose you administered sufficient to cause death independently? No, combined with the quantity of whiskey Martin typically consumed and any other substances he might have ingested. Possibly. Sarah paused. After I departed, Martin had access to my medical supplies. He knew I kept morphine and other opiates. If he woke and took more unaware of what I'd already given him, that could have caused an overdose. Are you suggesting he killed himself? I'm suggesting I don't know what transpired after I walked out that door. I only know I measured a sedative dose, not a lethal one. What Martin did afterward is something I'll never know. Harrison made extensive notes. Across the table, Drake's face purpled with rage, but he remained silent. The prosecutor continued questioning. About Sarah's training, about her knowledge of pharmacology, about whether she'd ever treated Martin for injuries sustained while intoxicated. Twice, Sarah admitted. Once when he fell and split his head open, once when he burned his hand on a lamp. Both times he was too intoxicated to remember the incident. Did you ever fear he would drink himself to death? Every single day. Sarah's voice softened. I watched him destroy himself one bottle at a time. But he always woke the following morning angrier than before, ready to take his self-hatred out on me. The deposition lasted 3 hours. By the conclusion, Sarah was exhausted, wrung out from reliving every terrible memory. But it was finished. The words were recorded. The truth, or as much of it as she could articulate, was documented. Harrison gathered his papers. Thank you for your testimony, Mrs. Brennan. Based on the evidence and your statement, the Commonwealth will not pursue criminal charges. The coroner has amended his report to indicate death by accidental overdose with contributing factors of chronic alcoholism. Drake shot to his feet. That's all. She admits to drugging him, and you're simply releasing her. She admits to administering a therapeutic dose of sedative to facilitate her escape from an abusive situation. That's not criminal, Colonel. Harrison's voice was weary. Your friend died because he combined opiates and alcohol in dangerous quantities. Whether Mrs. Brennan provided the initial dose or he consumed it all himself, the result is identical. This case is closed. The civil settlement, Whitmore reminded Drake. You agreed to drop all claims in exchange for the Hartford estate. Drake's hands clenched. For a moment, Sarah thought he might refuse, might tear up the agreement just to continue tormenting her. Then he pulled out a pen. I want written documentation that she never sets foot on Hartford land again, never uses the Hartford name. She relinquishes all rights, all claims, everything. Agreed, Sarah said immediately. I want nothing from Martin, not his name, not his property, not his memory. They signed the papers. Sarah's hand trembled as she wrote her name for the final time, as a Hartford then crossed it out and wrote Brennan underneath. It felt like shedding dead skin, leaving behind something that had never fit properly. Drake collected his copies and departed without another word. Sarah watched him go and felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, just hollow relief that it was finally concluded. Outside the courthouse, Whitmore shook her hand. You're free, Mrs. Brennan, free to return home and never look back. Free. The word echoed in Sarah's mind as she and Mrs. Collins made their way to the train station. The ghosts were gone. Martin Drake, the weight of everything she'd survived, all of it, finally released its grip. The train west couldn't depart fast enough. They traveled for 3 days, watching the landscape transform from city to farmland to the prairie to mountains. Sarah counted miles, counted hours, counted heartbeats, until she would see Jake and Emma again. Mrs. Collins dozed across from her, satisfied with the mission accomplished. Sarah held Rebecca's ring in her hand, feeling the weight of the gold, the promise it represented. Soon Jake would slide it back onto her finger. Soon she would be home. The train pulled into Prescott Station on a bright May afternoon. Sarah pressed her face against the window, searching the platform, and there they were, Jake and Emma, waiting. She was off the train before it fully stopped running toward them with complete abandon. Emma reached her first, throwing herself into Sarah's arms with a cry of joy. Then Jake was there, pulling them both close, and Sarah was laughing and crying simultaneously. You returned, Emma said into Sarah's shoulder. You really returned. I promised, didn't I? Sarah pulled back to look at Jake. I told you I'd fight my way home. Jake's eyes glistened. He pulled the ring from his pocket, took Sarah's left hand. Then let me fulfill my promise too. He slid the ring onto her finger, and Sarah felt the final piece click into place. She was home, truly, completely home. They drove back to the ranch as the sun set, painting the Wyoming sky in gold and pink. Emma chattered about everything that had happened during Sarah's absence. Jake said little, just kept one hand on Sarah's knee, as if reassuring himself she was real. The cabin looked exactly as Sarah had left it, but somehow more welcoming, more like home than anywhere had ever been. Emma ran ahead to show Sarah the baby chicks that had hatched. Jake caught Sarah's hand before she could follow. "I need to know," he said quietly. "Is it truly finished? Can we finally stop looking over our shoulders?" "It's finished." Drake obtained what he wanted. The prosecutor closed the case. "I'm free, Jake. We're free." He pulled her into his arms, then held her as if he would never release her. Sarah melted into his embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much it frightens me. Good frightened or bad frightened?" She laughed through her tears. "The best frightened. The kind that means I have something worth being afraid to lose." That night, after Emma was asleep, they made love with desperation, born of separation and relief. Jake worshipped every inch of Sarah's body, erasing the final shadows of Martin's violence with tenderness and passion. Sarah gave herself completely, holding nothing back, trusting him with her broken pieces. Afterward, wrapped in his arms, she finally permitted herself to believe in futures, in the possibility of happiness that endured, in the idea that she deserved this, deserved him, deserved the life they were building together. "I want children," she said into the darkness. "Our children, a house full of them." Jake's hand found her stomach spread wide over her belly. "Then we'll fill this ranch with babies, as many as you want. And I want to open a clinic, somewhere women can come when they're hurt and frightened. Somewhere they can receive help without judgment." "We'll build it, right here on our land." Jake kissed her temple. "Whatever you want, Sarah. Whatever you need. I'll spend the rest of my life ensuring you have it." They fell asleep, tangled together, and for the first time in years, Sarah's dreams were peaceful. 1 year later, Sarah gave birth to their first son. They named him David after Jake's brother. The labor was difficult, but Sarah's medical training served her well, and Mrs. Collins attended as midwife. When Sarah finally held her son Jake beside her, with tears streaming down his face, she understood what home truly meant. 5 years later, the clinic stood complete. A small building behind the main house where women traveled from miles around seeking treatment. Sarah asked no questions, judged no one, and slowly built a reputation as a healer who understood. Emma, now 13, learned nursing at Sarah's side, already displaying the compassion and skill that would eventually take her to Johns Hopkins Medical School. 10 years later, Sarah and Jake celebrated their 10th anniversary, surrounded by their 4 children. David at 9, Rebecca at 7, Thomas at 5, and baby Elizabeth just learning to walk. The ranch had expanded to 80 horses. The clinic treated dozens of women monthly. And Sarah had finally stopped looking over her shoulder, expecting Drake or Martin's ghost to appear. 25 years later, Emma returned from medical school with her degree and a fierce determination to help women the way Sarah had helped her adoptive mother. They expanded the clinic together, mother and daughter working side by side. Jake, now 58, still ran the ranch with help from their 3 sons. Elizabeth had married a rancher from the next county over, giving them their first grandchildren. Sarah stood on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Jake came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, rested his chin on her shoulder. They had aged together, their bodies marked by hard work and time's passage, but their love had only deepened. "Do you ever regret it?" Jake asked. "Surrendering the Hartford fortune, you could have been wealthy." Sarah turned in his arms to face him. "I am wealthy. I have you. I have our children and grandchildren. I have work that matters and a community that respects me. I have everything Martin's money could never purchase. I love you, Sarah Brennan. I love you, Jacob Brennan." They kissed as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, 2 survivors who had found each other in a blizzard and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. Inside the house, their grandchildren played while Emma supervised her own children, running between rooms with boundless energy. The clinic stood ready for tomorrow's patients. The ranch thrived under the care of Jake and his sons. Everything they had built together, everything they had fought for, surrounded them in testament to the power of choosing love over fear. 40 years later, Jake passed away peacefully at 73, surrounded by family in the home they had built together. Sarah, now 64, held his hand as he drew his final breath, whispering promises that she would follow when her time came. She lived 8 more years, continuing to run the clinic until her own health failed. Her final words to Emma were simple: "Tell him I'm coming. Tell him I'm ready." They were buried side by side on the ridge overlooking the valley, their graves marked with simple stones. Sarah Mitchell Hartford Brennan, beloved wife, mother, healer, 1859 to 1931. Jacob David Brennan, beloved husband, father, rancher, 1850 to 1923. Emma, now 72 herself, stood at their graves with her own children and grandchildren gathered around. The youngest great-grandchild, a girl of 8 named Sarah, asked about her namesake. "Tell us the story, Grandma," the child said, "about how great-grandma Sarah came to Wyoming." Emma smiled, settling onto the bench Jake had built beside the graves years ago. "It started with a blizzard," she began, "and a woman running from a past that wouldn't let her go. She stepped off a train into the worst storm Wyoming had seen in decades, abandoned by her driver, certain she would freeze to death. But your great-grandfather Jake was out looking for a lost calf, and he heard her calling through the wind." The story unfolded as it had been told countless times before. About morphine and murder accusations, about a mail-order marriage that became real, about Colonel Drake and the settlement that cost Sarah her inheritance but bought her freedom, about the clinic that had helped hundreds of women over the decade, about love found in the least likely place between 2 broken people learning to be whole again. "They taught us that love isn't about grand gestures," Emma concluded. "It's about standing beside someone when their past catches up to them, about choosing them every day, even when choosing them is difficult, about building something real from honest partnership rather than romantic fantasy." The children listened rapt. The youngest Sarah touched the gravestone gently. "Were they happy, Grandma? Happier than they ever thought possible," Emma said. "They survived terrible things to find each other, and in finding each other they discovered that survival isn't just about staying alive, it's about learning to truly live." The family dispersed gradually, returning to the ranch house for dinner. Emma remained behind, one hand on each gravestone. "You did it," she whispered to the graves. "You showed me what love looks like, what family means, what it means to fight for the people you love. I've tried to pass that on to my children, and they'll pass it to theirs. Your legacy isn't just this ranch or the clinic. It's the knowledge that broken people can heal, that the past doesn't have to poison the future, that second chances exist for those brave enough to take them." She stood, joints protesting, and walked back down the hill. Behind her, the Wyoming wind sang through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. The sun set over the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold. And on the ridge, 2 graves stood side by side, sheltering the remains of 2 people who had found each other in a blizzard and built a love that outlasted death itself. The clinic still operated now, run by Emma's daughter. The ranch still thrived, managed by Sarah and Jake's great-grandson. And in the small museum the family had created in the original cabin, visitors could see Sarah's medical bag, the journal. Mrs. Collins had kept the wedding certificate bearing 2 names, and the gold ring Jake had placed on Sarah's finger, twice a symbol of promises kept. The story lived on, passed from generation to generation. A reminder that even in the darkest blizzards, hope exists. That even the most broken people can find healing. That love, real love, is built not from perfection, but from 2 imperfect people choosing each other every day through every storm. And in Wyoming, where the wind still howls through the mountains and snow still falls, fierce and blinding people still tell the story of the nurse who fled murder accusations and the rancher who gave her sanctuary, of how they built a legacy that lasted long after they were gone, of how love, when it's real, never truly dies. It just changes form, passing from heart to heart, generation to generation, teaching each new listener the same eternal truth that the bravest thing we can do is choose to love even when we're terrified, even when we've been broken, even when the past threatens to destroy us. Because in the end, love is the only thing that saves us, the only thing that makes survival worthwhile, the only thing that transforms mere existence into truly living. Sarah and Jake had learned that lesson in a cabin during a blizzard, and they had spent the rest of their lives teaching it to everyone they touched. And long after their bodies returned to the earth, their lesson remained carved not just on gravestones, but on the hearts of everyone who heard their story and understood that they too deserved a second chance at love, at happiness, at life. The wind whispered across the Wyoming plains, carrying their story forward into the future, a promise that would never die, that somewhere in the worst storms, hope still exists. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, it finds us exactly when we need it most.